Welcoming to the show is the CEO of the International Legal Forum. Welcome, Arsen Ostrovsky.
Thank you, Rolene. Always great to be with you.
Over to you, as somebody who's on the front line of battling rising anti-Semitism, anti-Israelism, and if it wasn't for people like you, we really would be in a much worse position, because it's thanks to the efforts of you and your team at the International Legal Forum that we have won significant victories. So let's take a look at what the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is. We're not talking IHRA, the popular Jewish name. We're talking the definition of anti-Semitism. Tell us more about it and why it is so important.
Sure, gladly. Thank you, Rolene. Look, IHRA stands for the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. It is one of the leading NGOs, educational institutions, global in nature, that is devoted to not only Holocaust remembrance, but also education about racism in all its manifestations, but including as well anti-Semitism. Now, a number of years ago, about 5 or so, I'm not sure the exact year, recognizing the prevalence of Jew hatred, of anti-Semitism throughout the world, really, and noting also how it's coming from different sources, whether it's left-wing, right-wing, Islamists, whether it's in the form of attacks on Jews as individuals or on Israel as a Jew amongst the nations, which we can discuss about later as well. A group of experts, researchers really came together, and in a process, and also representatives of various countries from Europe, United States, South Africa, possibly as well, I'm not sure, but certainly from around the world came together. And after many hours and days and weeks of painstaking negotiation, they came to a definition, or a working definition, so to speak, of what is modern-day anti-Semitism. And this definition is it's very clear. It talks about not only about anti-Semitism as being attacks on Jews as individuals because of our race, because of our faith. Clear examples like age-old anti-Semitic stereotypes about greed, power, things like that we're seeing really a prevalence of today. But also the more modern side to anti-Semitism today, its manifestation in the attack and the assault on Israel as well. Now, it doesn't, it mentions Israel only insofar as that criticism leveled against Israel, as it is against any other country in the world, is not anti-Semitism, and that is absolutely correct. They're absolutely right to say so. But it does give a number of examples in which this kind of these kinds of statements or actions can morph or mutate into anti-Semitism. One of those, for example, is the denial of the Jewish people's right to self-determination, and that, of course, goes to the very root, the very core of what is Zionism. So this definition has now been adopted or endorsed by some 35 plus countries around the world, many in Europe, the United States, Australia, even Bahrain showed support as well. In the US, it's important to note also, given so much discussion is there today, that it does enjoy overwhelming bipartisan support from both sides. So this isn't something that is political. There's both sides of the US government have endorsed it enthusiastically, recognizing its importance. But you have not only 35 plus countries that have endorsed it, you now have also probably easily over 1,000 civil society institutions, anything from university campuses to corporations to football teams and so on. So really you have today what has become unequivocally the gold standard for identifying and defining what is anti-Semitism.
Because anti-Semitism really does manifest in different iterations throughout the years. You spoke a little bit about the traditional kind of anti-Semitism when it's an attack on faith, Jewish institutions, the way that we express ourselves religiously. And now the modern iteration is this anti-Zionism this saying that Jews, out of all the nations, all the peoples in the world, are the only ones who don't have a right to national aspirations and national liberation movement, and to call it Zionism. So this, as you've just said, is the gold standard by which we measure anti-Semitism. What does it mean when we say 35 countries adopted it, civil society organizations? What does it mean in practical and legal terms?
That's a great question. I mean, it means different things. I'll explain why. The working definition of anti-Semitism, according to IHRA, it's not necessarily meant to be a legally binding definition. What it does do, and it's really its primary purpose, is to facilitate and to allow governments, institutions, judicial authorities, police, to identify what is anti-Semitism. That is really its key purpose, that it allows you to identify and name what is actually anti-Semitism. Has an action or a statement that has been made or said or done, does that qualify as anti-Semitism, number one? If that is the case, then, as is the situation of every government or institution, they have different policies and recourses to dealing with these issues. Some have, for example, many states, for example, have legislation prohibiting discrimination according to different criteria: discrimination against race, gender, faith, national origin, and so on. So it's entirely possible in those circumstances that once you have identified that an act of anti-Semitism has occurred, you can then possibly prosecute it under the existing legal tools, because you now have a clear identification that an anti-Semitic act or statement has been made. So, but its primary purpose really is to serve as a guide or as a tool for authorities to identify when anti-Semitism has occurred. And different governments that have adopted it have done it in different ways. Some have specific legislation on anti-Semitism, Holocaust denial, and so on. Others have discrimination more generic on racial discrimination, in which case something like this can potentially fall under, and the appropriate authorities can then investigate it.
We're talking about more and more cities adopting it. I know Los Angeles adopted it over the weekend. I think the state of Maryland in the United States has adopted it. Can you give us some examples where IHRA has been used to either educate or to use legal mechanisms to either educate somebody or bring some kind of justice to somebody or an institution or an organization that has made anti-Semitic comments? I'm thinking off the top of my head, we've got the horrific example of Yay, and we've had just a couple of months ago, Ben and Jerry's, that example. Can you share some examples with our listeners who might not be so familiar with how it works, exactly how this is used practically?
Yeah, well, Kanye, I think, was a great example. We actually, through the International Legal Forum, we actually wrote to Adidas about Kanye, expressing our concerns. And amongst the things that we said, we were very clear that his statements qualify unequivocally as anti-Semitism, including as expressed under the IHRA definition. Of course, we saw just a few days ago, Adidas announced that they would be terminating their partnership with Kanye. I'll give a couple of other examples. In the UK, a number of universities over the last couple of years cancelled these anti-Semitic Israel Apartheid Week events on campus. Partly they did so because of the successful claim made that these events would fall under the IHRA working definition, precisely because these kinds of events, these Israel Apartheid Week events on campuses, which are, these unhinged displays of Jew hatred, of denying Israel's very right to exist, very clearly fall within that. So we saw that some of these events were not able to proceed. One other example I can give you is the Chelsea Football Club, for example. Chelsea, one of the most high-profile sporting teams in the world. They're actually the first football team, certainly in the British Premier League, to actually adopt the IHRA definition, when a number of other teams, including the British Premier League, followed as well in other leagues across the world. And what Chelsea have done, certainly in the last few years ago, they've not only used the IHRA working definition to identify anti-Semitism by whether it's by fans, by officials and so on, but then they've used it actually as a tool to educate people as well on what is modern-day anti-Semitism, on what is Holocaust distortion, on what are the dangers of racial hatred against Jews, and have given persons who, for example, they might have punished by saying, okay, this fan was guilty of expressing or committing an act of anti-Semitism, therefore they're banned for X number of games. If they wish to return, then they have to go through a certain number of steps in terms of education, in terms of showing that they have understood and learned what is anti-Semitism. So there's really a number of different ways in which it has been used, and it really continues to be used. And certainly today, as we're seeing, one other example I'll give you, on University of California, Berkeley, which has become, a hotspot of progressive left-wing anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, where just recently a number of student groups, for example, said that they would be banning Zionist speakers from campus from participating in events. And that has really garnered a lot of attention, partly questions on whether this is a free speech issue or an issue of discrimination, which is what we are certainly contending. But it does really go also to the core of is this an act of anti-Semitism? Is denying Zionist speakers an act of anti-Semitism? Is Zionism also a core and integral part of our collective Jewish identity? So certainly in terms of determining whether there has been an incident of anti-Semitism, we're looking very carefully at the IHRA definition as a guide. It's very clear, not only in defining what isn't anti-Semitism, this criticism leveled against Israel that is leveled against any country, and that's fine, but it does give you a number of examples of contemporary forms of anti-Semitism, not only the denial of Israel's or Jewish people's rights to self-determination. It talks about using various conspiracy theories. It talks about stereotypes of comparisons of Jews or Israelis to Nazis and so on. So it's very clear not only in terms of what is not anti-Semitism, but more importantly also what is anti-Semitism, and really gives us this indispensable tool in terms of identifying this and taking appropriate recourse.
I mean, criticizing Israeli policy is the national sport of Israelis. Without it, where would we be? We could turn that into a Olympic event. But there has been some criticism and some pushback. And over the past couple of days, we've heard from a Hollywood actor. I mean, he plays the Hulk. I don't know what qualifications he has to speak about anti-Semitism. Mark Ruffalo, he has pushed back. But also, very worryingly, is the UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories. That's the definition given in the mandate, people. So please don't send me the hate mail for using the O word. Francesca Albanese has also pushed back significantly. Why do you think they are so triggered by this?
They are triggered by Israel, quite simply. These are people who say, we're not anti-Semites. This is where we're not saying anything derogatory about Jews, but they just fail to grasp the fact that you don't have to be an anti-Semite by solely attacking Jews as individuals. You can also be an anti-Semite by attacking, by vilifying, demonizing, and legitimizing Israel as a collective Jew amongst the nations. And that really goes to the core, to the very heart of what is modern-day anti-Semitism. So people like Mark Ruffalo, like Francesca, like journalists like Mehdi Hassan, who brings on his show recently people like Peter Beinart and Ran Omar to discuss anti-Semitism, but then very openly himself says that he's an anti-Zionist. Rolene, let there be no ifs, buts, and maybes. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, full stop.
Can you just say that again? Can you say that again for the people in the back who've been questioning, maybe pushing back, maybe thinking we should tone down the language? people like J Street, people supporting the Jerusalem Declaration. Can you say that again, please, Arsen Ostrovsky?
Sure. I mean, let there be no ifs, buts, or maybes. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, full stop. People that try and water down this definition, people that try and bring in other definitions, what they're really trying to do is that they're trying to get their anti-Semitism in through the back door. And we need to call out this facade. We need to call out this attack really for what it is. These are cowards trying to find excuses for their own anti-Semitism. So we need to call them out loud and clear. You know, when you're talking about the UN, there probably is no greater source of anti-Semitism than the United Nations. You know, this body of the Human Rights Council, which has condemned Israel almost more than the rest of the world put together, which has a single item on their agenda devoted just to Israel, and then one item devoted to the rest of the world, which gives us such commissions of inquiry with members like Nabi Pillay and Mimun Kafari, who, if you might recall, just a few months ago, said that, quote, the Jewish lobby, end quote, controls social media. And these are the people who sit in judgment of Israel and then have the audacity to say that they are not anti-Semites. That is why they are triggered. They are triggered precisely because the definition, the working definition of IHRA calls them out.
Before we let you go, you've just mentioned the United Nations and its disproportionate focus on the state of Israel, and we see it through the resolutions and through these insane commissions of inquiry and different mandates. It has now become a place where there's institutionalized anti-Semitism. So what are our chances of getting the United Nations, which is supposed to be the world's great bastion, great policeman of human rights, to adopt IHRA?
Look, Rolene, I wish I had better news, but our chances are slim to none, because if the United Nations adopted the IHRA definition, they themselves would have to be called out for anti-Semitism. So I don't see that happening, partly because our numbers at the UN, the numbers are just really stacked, not only against Israel, but very much against the West, against the values that we hold so dear, like democracy, rule of law, free speech. When we look at organizations like the UN Human Rights Council, which have member states like Venezuela, China, Pakistan, Qatar, these are no great bastions of democracy or human rights, or those who care about racial tolerance or combating anti-Semitism. And you have to, remember the UN itself, it was created in 1945 in the wake of the Holocaust, but it has today become, sadly, probably the #1 purveyor of global anti-Semitism, not only as it is reflected in the attacks against Jews, but in the singling out and the demonization and the delegitimization of the sole Jewish state, Israel. And you see that through the UN General Assembly, through the Human Rights Council, through UNRWA, through the various bodies and agencies. It's really systematic. It really goes to the core of the UN as a whole. And as we call out individuals, organizations, we have to call out the UN when they're guilty of anti-Semitism as well. And that's certainly something we do.
Well, we can't thank you enough, because without you and your organization, we would be in a lot worse a position. And thank you for the invaluable work that you do every single day, absolutely tirelessly.